What's something your parents believe that you don't?
At our joint birthday party, surrounded by the smell of supermarket cake frosting and cheap Prosecco, Tessa raised her glass, smiled that sharp little smile she's been perfecting since middle school, and announced she was moving to Paris. Just like that. No warning. No build-up. No acknowledgement that I was standing 2 feet away, holding a knife over our birthday cake, which, by the way, I had ordered, picked up, paid for, and had customized with both our names in looping cursive. She just stood there in front of 40 people, family, coworkers, old neighbors, a few friends of mine who'd taken the train in, and said it like we were all extras in the movie of her life. I didn't mean to steal the attention, she added with a chuckle, then gave this sideways smirk like she knew exactly what she was doing. But hey, life's short. My mother clapped. My aunt gasped. Someone, I think it was her yoga friend from San Diego, actually said "wow" out loud. I just stood there, still, holding that damn knife, frozen somewhere between smile and stroke, pretending I wasn't bleeding from somewhere invisible. Let me give you context. Tessa has always been the dramatic one, the spontaneous one, the beautiful mess everyone forgives because she means well or she's just finding herself. She was the kid who wore pink cowboy boots to church, the one who cut her hair during recess and told the teacher she was expressing freedom. And me? I was the responsible one. I was the straight-A student, the scheduler, the one who remembered to buy toilet paper and who called Dad every Sunday after his stroke. Even when we were kids, she had this way of sucking up all the air in the room and making you thank her for it. And when our dad passed away 5 years ago, the only person who ever really saw through her shine, it was like the last layer of accountability died with him. So when she dropped the Paris bomb at what was supposed to be our shared celebration, which, for the record, was my idea, planned at Mom's house because Tessa's downtown loft is too chaotic, I shouldn't have been surprised. But I was. Not because she did it. But because even at 42, a part of me still believed that maybe this year, for once, we'd just eat cake, blow out candles, and be two grown women sharing a birthday without someone trying to outshine the other. I was wrong. After she finished her little champagne monologue, there was this weird pause, like everyone was waiting to see how I'd react. I gave a polite nod, said "wow, big move," and excused myself to the kitchen where I pretended to refill the ice bucket while biting down so hard on the inside of my cheek I tasted blood. Jason, my husband, followed me in about 5 minutes later. He didn't say anything at first, just leaned against the fridge and raised one eyebrow, like he does when he's holding back a lecture. I broke the silence first. She really knows how to make an entrance, huh? He gave a soft laugh, then said something that stuck in my brain like a splinter. You could go too, you know. Who says Paris is hers? Now let me be clear, Jason isn't some guy who throws out advice for the sake of sounding wise. He's quiet, thoughtful, the type who reads articles on plane rides and actually remembers where the fire extinguisher is kept. But in that moment, what he said wasn't advice. It was permission. And I hadn't realized until that second how badly I wanted someone to say that. Not just about Paris, but about everything. About stepping out of the role I'd been assigned since birth. About doing something reckless for no one's benefit but mine. That night, long after the party was over and Tessa had left in a swirl of perfume and clinking jewelry, "I've got a photo shoot early tomorrow," she'd said with a wink. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan. I could still hear her voice echoing in my head, that smug tone she used when she said "life's short," as if every boring, careful choice I've made somehow disqualified me from having dreams of my own. Jason was already asleep beside me, but I stayed up, heart pounding in a way I hadn't felt in years, maybe decades. I kept thinking about all the things I'd planned to say during my birthday toast, about aging, about gratitude, about making peace with what you can't control. I'd even written something down. It was still in my coat pocket. I never read it. No one asked me to. So I got up. I walked to the living room, opened my laptop, and typed in 3 words that felt like they belonged to someone else: flights to Paris. I don't know what I expected, maybe sky-high prices or no availability, but it wasn't what I saw. 2 seats. Non-stop. 1 week out. Affordable. as if the world had just been waiting for me to stop making excuses. I hovered over the purchase button for a long time. Not because I wasn't sure, but because I was so sure it scared me. And then I clicked. Just like that. No announcement. No toast. No spotlight. Just a quiet revolution at midnight, while my sister probably lay in her fancy bed dreaming about croissants and camera angles. I didn't book it to follow her. I booked it because she thought she owned the idea of adventure, the right to escape, the claim to Paris, as if bold choices were a currency she'd patented. But guess what? I studied French in college. I used to dream of living in the 6th arrondissement. I used to make lists of bakeries I wanted to try. I shelved all of it for work, for family, for predictability. She lit her match in front of everyone. But I've been holding gasoline for years. And here's the part you might not agree with. I didn't call her. I didn't warn her. I didn't clear the air like a good big sister should. The next morning, I posted a picture of my plane tickets on Facebook. No caption. No tag. Just 2 one-way tickets and a little GPS pin that said soon. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. The screen lit up with her name. I picked up. And before I could even say hello, she was screaming. And now let me ask you something. When someone steals the spotlight for decades and finally gets a taste of her own medicine, is that revenge? Or is it just balance finally being restored? Think about that. I'll tell you what she screamed in the next part. When my phone started vibrating on the kitchen counter, just 5 minutes after I'd posted the photo of the plane tickets, I didn't even have to look at the screen to know who it was. There was a kind of silent heat in the air, the kind you feel before a thunderstorm cracks open the sky, and somehow I knew it wasn't going to be a conversation, it was going to be an eruption. I stood there for a moment, letting the phone buzz and hop like it had a soul of its own, before I finally picked it up, pressed accept, and held it to my ear without saying a word. The silence on my end only seemed to pour gasoline on her already lit fuse. Her voice came through so shrill, so piercing, it felt like she was standing beside me with her hands clenched, eyes wide, pacing like she used to when our parents told her no to anything. "Are you kidding me right now? Are you actually serious?" she screeched, as if I'd just broken some sacred law that had always kept our lives orbiting around her little emotional sun. I still didn't speak. I let her keep going, because people like Tessa don't just speak, they perform, and I've learned that the first act always burns the hottest. "You ruined it. You ruined my moment. You couldn't just let me have this one thing, could you?" Her voice was high and breathless, not from sadness, but from rage, the kind of rage that only makes sense to someone who's always been used to getting away with murder as long as they smiled sweetly enough afterward. I took a slow breath and finally said, in the calmest voice I could muster, I didn't say a word. I just posted a picture. That's all. I heard her inhale sharply, like my calmness was more insulting than a scream. Don't play dumb with me, Emily. You've never wanted to go to Paris. You booked those tickets to spite me. Admit it. What she didn't understand, what she never really could understand, was that I had wanted Paris for a long time. Not her version of Paris with berets and Instagram shots from Montmartre, but a quiet Paris, one where I could sit alone in a cafe and drink espresso without being asked to fix someone's problem or cover someone's lie. But in her mind, anything I did that didn't involve supporting her or staying out of her light was an act of sabotage. And maybe, in some way, this was sabotage not of her dream, but of the narrative she'd built where I always stepped aside so she could go first. You always do this, she continued, voice cracking now, not with sadness, but with that brand of frustration only a golden child feels when someone dares challenge their birthright. You wait until I finally have something good, and then you come in and tear it apart. You've always been jealous, but this is cruel. I almost laughed, but the bitterness caught in my throat like a pill that went down wrong. Jealous? Of what? Of being the center of attention while everything else fell apart behind her? Of being the person who showed up late, unprepared, but still got applause just for arriving? I stepped outside onto the porch, the cold morning air cutting through my robe, and stared out across the backyard that was still littered with paper plates and wilting balloons from the party the day before. There were 2 folding chairs still under the string lights, one of them knocked over, probably from the wind, but symbolically it felt like something more. Tessa, I said finally, you made your announcement. I made mine. You did it in front of 40 people with champagne. I did it quietly. What's the difference? She let out this guttural noise, somewhere between a groan and a scream, and said, because mine was real. Mine was something I was working toward. You just did it to hurt me. And here's the thing, maybe I did. Maybe, somewhere deep down, I posted that picture not just to claim space for myself, but to slice into her illusion that she was the only one brave enough to want more. But I also knew she hadn't bought her ticket. I knew she hadn't applied for the visa. I knew because she never does the follow-through. She builds castles out of air and expects everyone else to pretend they're real, and when one brick falls, she points fingers instead of admitting she never laid a foundation in the first place. I told her, you can still go. I'm not stopping you. There's a whole city over there. It's big enough for both of us. But she didn't want the city. She wanted the moment. The spotlight. The applause. And the idea of sharing that, or worse, being overshadowed, was too much for her fragile little ego. You're disgusting, she spat, voice shaking now. You've always been bitter and small. And you'll always be second best. Even in Paris. And then she hung up. Just like that. No dramatic finish. No grand exit. Just the hard click of disconnection. I stood there, staring at the screen, the quiet hum of my thoughts louder than her voice had been. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt still. For the first time in what felt like years, I wasn't spinning around her orbit. I wasn't trying to be the better sister, or the smarter daughter, or the quieter woman. I was just someone who had made a choice. And she couldn't handle it. Later that day, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail, but of course I listened. Her voice was soft, but laced with that same tone I remembered from high school, the one she used when Tessa got caught shoplifting or failed a class. Emily, sweetheart. I just think maybe you should have talked to your sister before posting something like that. She's going through a lot. You know she's sensitive. Couldn't this have waited? And there it was. The same old song. The same excuse. The same subtle way I was asked to shrink, to smooth things over, to be the bigger person. But this time, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel like fixing it. I felt tired of pretending that being good meant being silent, being smaller, being accommodating. So I texted her back, one sentence. This time, I'm not stepping aside. I don't know what I expected, but there was no reply. Not from my mother. Not from Tessa. Just silence. And maybe that was the loudest thing of all. I didn't post anything else that day. I didn't call anyone. I packed my suitcase slowly, deliberately, folding clothes with more intention than I've ever given myself before. I kept the ticket confirmation on my nightstand, looked at it once before bed like someone might a map of a world they've dreamed about for years, but never dared to believe was real. In a week, I would be in Paris. Alone. Unapologetically. And I still didn't know if she'd go too. But deep down, I had a feeling she'd try. Not because she wanted to chase her dream, but because she couldn't stand to see me live mine first. The next part? That's when the story takes a turn I didn't see coming. Because for the first time in our lives, the lie she'd built started to crack, and what spilled out was something even she didn't expect. There's a certain kind of silence that comes after a storm, not the kind that soothes you, like rain pattering on a rooftop while you curl up with a book, but the kind that lingers like smoke after a fire, reminding you that something burned and that it wasn't just the air that got scorched. That was the kind of silence I sat in the next morning, drinking coffee that had gone cold in my hands, staring out the kitchen window at the sagging balloon arch that had started to collapse under its own weight, like some sad metaphor for the version of my life I'd been trying to hold together for far too long. It was in that moment, as I stood barefoot on the tile with my mug balanced in both hands, that the weight of it all, the years of smiling through resentment, the decades of letting Tessa star in a show I wasn't even sure I'd auditioned for, finally settled into something sharper, something closer to clarity. I wish I could tell you that the flight booking was impulsive, that I'd acted on some wild emotional urge and immediately regretted it, but that would be a lie, and I've spent too many years lying to myself in small ways to keep the peace. The truth is, when I clicked purchase, I felt something shift deep inside, like a locked door creaking open after years of silence. I didn't book that trip to be petty. I didn't do it to match her announcement or to one-up her theatrical display. I did it because, for the first time in years, I wanted to feel like my life was mine again, not a reactive counterpoint to hers, not the backstage crew to her endless monologue, but something real, something rooted in choice rather than compromise. And the idea that that was the thing that shattered our fragile balance told me everything I needed to know about the roles we'd been playing. The thing about growing up with someone like Tessa is that the rest of the world gets so easily seduced by her shine that they never stop to wonder who's cleaning up after the fireworks. She was the child with the wild eyes and crooked smile, the one who got too excited and knocked over the vase, but never got punished because she meant well. I was the one who swept up the glass. Always. I was the one who apologized to the guests, the one who got scolded for being too hard on her, for expecting too much, as though wanting accountability from a sibling 3 years younger was some kind of cruelty. By the time I was 12, I knew that if Tessa got hurt, I would be blamed. If she messed up, I would be the one asked to fix it, and if I ever dared to have needs of my own, I'd be told in that soft, exhausted voice Mom always used when she didn't want to deal with anything real, "Emily, can't you just let it go?" And I did. I let it go. Again and again. For birthdays, holidays, weddings, funerals, job interviews, breakups, car accidents, you name it. I let it go when she borrowed my clothes without asking, when she moved in with me during that disastrous divorce and turned our spare room into a cluttered studio she never cleaned. I let it go when she skipped Dad's chemo appointments because hospitals make her anxious, even though he used to cry when she wasn't there. I let it go when she told me she was thinking about going back to school, and I spent 3 weeks helping her apply for a program she quit 2 weeks later. Letting it go became the language I spoke in our family, and I became fluent in silence and sacrifice. But something changed when Dad died. Maybe it was the way he looked at me in those final days, not with pity, but with something closer to regret, like he knew he should have said more, done more, been more than just the quiet counterweight to my mother's blind devotion to her younger daughter. One night, while I was spoon-feeding him bland soup and pretending it didn't break my heart to see him so diminished, he grabbed my hand, squeezed it weakly, and whispered, "I see you, Em." I always did. He said it like a confession, and I carried it with me like a prayer. But even that wasn't enough to change the script we were stuck in. So when my mother called and, in the most measured voice she could muster, suggested that maybe I should apologize, just to keep the peace, I realized how deep the rot really went. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask why I had bought the tickets, or what I was hoping to find, or even whether I wanted to go. Her concern was for Tessa's feelings, Tessa's reaction, Tessa's version of the story. I told her I wasn't interested in keeping the peace anymore, and I hung up before she could respond. I knew that silence would echo louder than any argument. Jason, bless him, watched all of this unfold without pressing me, without asking me to explain the layers of pain I was peeling back like wallpaper from a rotting wall. That night, we sat on the couch watching some rerun of a show we both barely followed, and he turned to me and said, without even looking away from the screen, "Maybe it's not about Paris. Maybe it's about not being second anymore." That was it. That was all he said. And I swear to you, I almost cried, not because it was poetic or profound, but because it was true in a way that felt like someone had taken my ribcage and pried it open, just enough to let a little air in. I started making real preparations. I dusted off my old French textbooks, surprised myself by remembering more than I thought I would, and began planning where I might stay, what I might do, how I might exist in a place where nobody knew me as Tessa's older sister or Joan's reliable daughter. I didn't tell many people. A few close friends at work. One of my college roommates who now lived in Lyon and had always begged me to visit. For once, I didn't want applause or attention. I just wanted freedom. Quiet, clean, and mine. But 2 days before my flight, I received a message that stopped me cold. It was a voice memo from Tessa, a full 3 minutes long, sent in the middle of the night. Her voice was hushed, emotional in a way that felt carefully curated, a kind of performative vulnerability I'd heard before. She said she'd been spiraling, that she didn't have the money to go anymore, that she hadn't applied for the visa, that everything had fallen apart. She said she was humiliated, that I'd made her look like a joke, that everyone was now asking her if she was copying me. And then she added the line that made me pause, just for a second. It was never about the place, Em. It was about the story I wanted to tell. The story. That was the thing. For Tessa, life has always been a story, and she's always needed to be the main character. And me? I was never even in the credits. But this time, I had written my own beginning. The flight was in 48 hours. My bags were packed. And I didn't care if she followed or not. Because finally, I wasn't going to Paris to chase her. I was going to find myself in a version of life where she wasn't the lens through which everything was filtered. And yet, some part of me, the old part, the one raised to expect the unexpected with Tessa, couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. What came next would prove just how far she was willing to go when the story didn't end the way she wanted. The moment the plane's wheels touched down at Charles de Gaulle, I felt something shift inside me. Not a triumphant swelling of pride, not even relief, but a strange, low-burning calm, like the quiet hum of a machine that had finally been switched on after years of neglect. The sky outside was that pale, washed-out gray so typical of Paris mornings in late spring, a kind of light that seemed to both flatten and romanticize everything it touched. And as I stood in the customs line with my passport gripped tightly in my hand, I wasn't thinking about sightseeing or landmarks or even the version of myself I might become in this city. I was thinking about the silence, hers, mine, the one that stretched out between us after her last voice message, and I was wondering what kind of sister listens to someone cry and still boards the plane anyway. But I had made a decision, and I was done apologizing for it. For the first time in my adult life, I had chosen something purely for myself, not out of guilt, not out of obligation, not because someone needed me to show up or fill in or explain. And though there was still a small voice in the back of my mind, the one shaped by decades of conflict avoidance and careful moderation, whispering that maybe I'd taken it too far, that maybe I should have reached out or explained or softened the blow, I ignored it. That voice had never served me. It had only ever kept me small. I had rented a modest studio apartment in the 5th arrondissement, a quiet, bookish little corner of the city not far from the Sorbonne, where the streets still smelled like ink and philosophy. The building was old, stone-framed, with creaky floors and a wrought iron balcony just wide enough to fit a chair and a coffee cup. I had found it online, fell in love with the pictures, and booked it on instinct, something I almost never did. I was always the researcher, the review reader, the type who agonized over details and second-guessed even the smallest decisions. But this time, I trusted my gut, and it felt, oddly, like the beginning of something. The first few days passed in a kind of quiet rhythm, the kind that makes you realize how much of your life has been noise. I walked for hours without a destination, let the city lead me like a thread through a labyrinth of old stone and ivy and light. I drank espresso at tiny cafes where nobody knew my name, ordered in broken French that slowly began to stitch itself back together, and let the silence of being alone feel like comfort instead of punishment. I wasn't reinventing myself, not exactly, I was remembering myself. The parts of me that had been buried under years of compromise and quiet resentment. I hadn't heard from Tessa since that last message, the late-night voice memo with her hushed panic and guilt-laced blame. I hadn't responded. I hadn't deleted it either. It sat there in my inbox like a paperweight, reminding me of what I'd left behind and why I wasn't ready to return. I didn't know if she'd followed through on anything, her move, her visa, her half-formed plans, and part of me assumed she hadn't. Not because she couldn't, but because deep down, she never needed to. For Tessa, the fantasy had always been enough. She was the kind of person who treated potential like currency, dangling plans like shiny ornaments, expecting admiration just for dreaming. But on my third day in the city, I got the confirmation I wasn't looking for. I received a message from an old family friend, someone who had been at the party, someone who, I later learned, had been following both our social media posts with the kind of invested curiosity usually reserved for daytime soap operas. The message was short but pointed. So, you actually went? Because Tessa's telling everyone you copied her, and now she's the one who can't afford it. What the hell is going on? I sat there staring at the screen, a croissant half-eaten on my plate, the noise of the cafe swelling and fading around me, and I realized, with a mix of disgust and a strange, almost guilty amusement, that she hadn't come. She had never intended to come. The whole thing, the toast, the announcement, the dramatic energy she'd wrapped herself in like a silk scarf, had been a performance, and I had stolen her final act by stepping onto the stage without waiting for my cue. She hadn't lost a dream. She had lost control of the narrative. And what did she do when the audience stopped clapping? She rewrote the script and painted herself the victim. It was always the same cycle: provoke, collapse, blame, and our family, like a well-rehearsed ensemble, always fell into place. But this time, I wasn't there to play the part. I had exited the story. Instead of replying, I posted a photo. Nothing elaborate. Just me, seated at a little round table by the Seine, a cup of coffee in hand, the Eiffel Tower blurred in the background. The caption was simple: living it. Not just posting it. Within minutes, I saw the ripple. Comments, messages, a new post from Tessa, a quote graphic in muted tones. Some people only feel big when they shrink others. But I rise anyway. No mention of me, of course. But the timing was transparent. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to defend myself, explain myself, or ask for fairness. I let it float by like smoke from a chimney, distant and irrelevant. That night, as I sat on the narrow balcony of my apartment, the city lights winking between ancient rooftops, I realized something I had never dared to believe before. I was not obligated to play a role I had never auditioned for. I didn't need to be the steady one, the fixer, the self-sacrificing saint. I could be selfish. I could be messy. I could be silent. And in that silence, I was beginning to hear myself more clearly than I ever had. I had started attending a conversational French group at a local bookstore, joined a walking tour led by a woman named Elise who made offhand jokes about her ex-husband and smoked clove cigarettes between stops. I wasn't building a new life. I was trying one on, seeing how it fit. And it didn't feel like running away. It felt like coming home, not to a place, but to an idea of myself I had abandoned long ago. But just when I thought the story might finally quiet down, that perhaps Tessa had retreated, had accepted the consequences of her own empty declarations, I received an email. It came late at night, the subject line simple: you won. Hope you're happy. There was no body text, no signature, just that flat, bitter sentence, dropped like a stone into a still pond. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Because the truth was, I hadn't won anything. I had simply stopped losing. But something told me that for Tessa, that distinction was unforgivable. And something else told me she wasn't done. Not by a long shot. There's a strange kind of stillness that settles in after you've made a decision that changes the direction of your life, a quiet that doesn't scream or celebrate, but rather hums just beneath the surface like an old engine idling, waiting for the next inevitable shift in motion, and I suppose that's what those final weeks in Paris felt like. Not a climax, not a victory lap, not even a clean break from everything I'd left behind, but more like the soft echo of my own voice finally learning to speak in a register that belonged only to me. The air in the apartment had grown familiar, the kind of familiarity that wraps around your shoulders not like a lover, but like a coat you found in the back of someone else's closet, slightly worn, smelling faintly of something you can't quite name, and still, somehow, fitting better than anything you'd bought for yourself in years. The days moved slowly, deliberately, like an old metronome ticking away a rhythm I had never learned to play by, and in that slowness, I started to feel the outlines of myself returning. Not the version of me that took calls at midnight because someone needed something, or the one who nodded politely while the same old family dynamics played out like reruns we'd all memorized, but the one who sat alone in bookstores and lingered too long in quiet cafes without reaching for her phone, the one who watched people pass by without comparing herself to them, the one who let her own thoughts unfold without rushing to explain or fix or soften the edges. One afternoon, while walking along the canal with no real destination in mind, I met a woman named Noelle, 62, silver hair pulled into a soft knot at the nape of her neck, eyes that had clearly seen too much to care about pretending, and she invited me, without hesitation, to sit beside her on a bench worn smooth by time. She asked me where I was from, and I told her without thinking, somewhere I had to leave to remember I didn't belong. She laughed, not cruelly, but knowingly, like she'd once said the same thing to someone else on a different bench in a different city. Over the course of an hour and a half, maybe more, she told me about how she had left her family at 50, packed a single suitcase, and moved to Paris after realizing that no one in her life actually knew who she was without the context of what she'd always done for them. Sometimes you have to set fire to the version of you they keep in their heads, she said, sipping espresso without apology, because otherwise you'll spend the rest of your life keeping someone else's illusion alive. And, just like that, something clicked inside me, not a grand epiphany, not a Hollywood breakthrough, but a small, sharp truth settling quietly into place. A few days later, I visited a cemetery just outside the city, a place I'd read about once in an old article, and I brought with me a letter I had written long before I boarded the plane, a letter to my father, the only person who had ever managed to see beneath the calm, competent exterior I'd worn like armor for so long. I didn't read it aloud. I didn't cry. I just folded it slowly, tucked it under a small rock beside the roots of a weathered tree, and walked away with a strange sense of permission that I hadn't known I was waiting for. And then, just when I had started to believe that maybe, just maybe, the final chapter had been written and the book could be closed quietly, it happened. On a Tuesday, gray, uneventful, the kind of day that slips past unnoticed until something jars it out of invisibility, I returned to the apartment after a morning of errands, arms full of groceries and cheap flowers, and found her standing in front of the building like a misplaced thought, dressed in a long coat too thin for the weather, holding nothing but a canvas bag and a look that could cut through glass. Tessa had arrived in Paris. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at me with that expression she wore when she was about to lie or confess or both, and I remember thinking, absurdly, that she looked older, not in the way time ages you, but in the way resentment calcifies the parts of a person that were once soft. I didn't invite her up. I didn't step aside. I just stood there, letting the moment stretch between us like a tightrope, and after what felt like a full minute, she broke the silence with a question that wasn't really a question at all. "So," she said, her voice sharp, eyes flicking toward the door behind me, "you think you're better now?" It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't even angry. It was something worse, that passive, quiet condescension she used when she was trying to make you feel small without raising her voice. And for the first time in our lives, I didn't flinch. I didn't rush to fill the silence or defend my choices or remind her that my actions had nothing to do with her. I just looked at her and replied, as evenly and honestly as I could, "No. Just not worse." We stood there for a long moment, both of us holding the weight of everything unsaid, the childhoods we never questioned, the roles we never auditioned for but were forced to play, the birthdays, the betrayals, the quiet wounds that had shaped us into women who didn't know how to love each other without also keeping score. And then, something rare happened. She smiled. But not the usual smile, not the rehearsed smirk or the triumphant grin or the saccharine pout she used when she wanted something. It was a tired smile. A real one. And for the first time, it wasn't about performance. We ended up walking. Not talking, not explaining, just walking side by side through unfamiliar streets, both of us, perhaps, realizing that whatever version of this relationship we had clung to, it was no longer useful, and, maybe, for the first time, we were both just two women trying to navigate the wreckage of who we'd been told to be. We didn't make peace that day. We didn't reconcile or hug or promise to start over. But we sat at a cafe, ordered 2 coffees, and didn't argue. And in our silence, there was something resembling understanding, not forgiveness, not closure, but a beginning built on honesty rather than performance. And now, looking back at everything that led us here, the party, The tickets, the screaming phone calls, the resentment, the selfishness, the cold mornings and quiet victories, I still don't know if it was worth it. I don't know if hurting her was necessary, or if the distance I created will ever heal the way I want it to. But I do know this. I stopped being the supporting act in a story I never agreed to star in, and in doing so, I discovered a version of myself that doesn't need applause, or validation, or anyone else's permission to exist. And maybe that, in the end, is the only answer we ever get. Even if it leaves everyone else wondering what comes next.